Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for another poetry discussion. A poetry discussion that comes to us from Robert Frost in his collection, New Hampshire. New Hampshire. The question today is of the poem titled The Grindstone, which reads as such. Having a wheel and four legs of its own has never availed the cumbersome grindstone to get it anywhere that I can see. These hands have helped it go and even race, not all the motion, though, they ever lent, not all the miles it may have thought it went, have got it one step from the starting place. It stands beside the same old apple tree. The shadow of the apple tree is thin upon it now. Its feet are fast in snow. All other farm machinery is gone in, and some of it on no more legs and wheel than the grindstone can boast or stand or go. I'm thinking chiefly of the wheelbarrow. For months it hasn't known the taste of steel, washed down with rusty water in a tin, but standing outdoors hungry in the cold, except in towns at night, is not a sin. And anyway, its standing in the yard under a ruinous live apple tree has nothing any more to do with me, except that I remember how of old one summer day, all day I drove it hard, and someone mounted on it rode it hard, and he and I between us ground a blade. I gave it the preliminary spin and poured on water, tears it might have been. And when it almost gaily jumped and flowed, a Father Time-like man got on and rode. Armed with a scythe and spectacles that glowed, he turned on willpower to increase the load and slow me down, and I abruptly slowed. Like coming to a sudden railroad station, I changed from hand to hand in desperation. I wondered what the machine of ages gone this represented an improvement on. For all I knew, it may have sharpened spears and arrowheads itself. Much use for years had gradually worn it to an oblate spheroid that kicked and struggled in its gait, appearing to return me hate for hate. But I forgave it now as easily as any other boyhood enemy whose pride has failed to get him anywhere. I wondered who it was the man thought ground, the one who held the wheel back or the one who gave his life to keep it going round. I wondered if he really thought it fair for him to have the say when we were done. Such were the bitter thoughts to which I turned. Not for myself was I so much concerned, oh no, although of course I could have found a better way to pass the afternoon than grinding discord out of a grindstone and beating insects at their gritty tune. Nor was I for the man so much concerned. Once when the grindstone almost jumped its bearing, it looked as if it might be badly thrown and wounded on his blade. So far from caring, I laughed and sighed and only cranked the faster. It ran as if it wasn't greased but glued. I'd welcome any moderate disaster that might be calculated to postpone what evidently nothing could conclude. The thing that made me more and more afraid was that we'd ground it sharp and hadn't known, and now we're only wasting precious blade. And when he raised it, dripping once and tried the creepy edge of it with wary touch, and viewed it over his glasses, funny-eyed, only disinterestedly, to decide it needed one more turn, I could have cried. Wasn't there danger of a turn too much? Mightn't we make it worse instead of better? I was for leaving something to the wetter. What if it wasn't all it should be? I'd be satisfied if he'd be satisfied. So I think what we have here is a really interesting microcosm. What happens here? Our speaker is reminiscing of an old grindstone, an ancient type of thing, so old, so used, so worn, that the grindstone itself was ground out of shape. He remembers a story where he and another man ground a blade together, our speaker running the stone and his partner manning the blade. They grind and grind and grind, with our speaker hoping for catastrophe, if just to be done. So, this is a simple story, right? And it is sort of something that one might imagine if they were to construct some AI written Robert Frost poem. Two cantankerous people working hard labor, presumably in the cold, right? So what's the core metaphor here? You know, you might very well come to the conclusion that it's about how people have to coexist, and the core message, I suppose that would be, not the core metaphor. That people have to coexist, that working together is really what gets us through, even if we're different, things like that. But there is a single word choice upon which I think a great deal of work can be made here with this poem. When discussing the grindstone itself, for all I knew, it may have sharpened spears and arrowheads itself. Much use for years had gradually worn it, an oblate spheroid that kicked and struggled in its gait, appearing to return me hate for hate. Oblate spheroid there. So a grindstone looks a lot like a wheel when it's new, squared edges, things like that. But as time goes on and the stone itself wears down, it becomes, like Robert Frost says here, an oblate spheroid. A very famous example, if you ask yourself, what's an oblate spheroid? A very famous example of an oblate spheroid, the planet we're living on. The planet we're living on is an oblate spheroid. It is not a sphere. It sort of bulges towards the equator. Imagining that grindstone as an image for the world, the earth, our planet. Imagining it that way. Listen to this one more time. For all I knew, it may have sharpened spears and arrowheads itself. Much use for years had gradually worn it, an oblate spheroid, that kicked and struggled in its gait, appearing to return me hate for hate. But I forgive it now as easily as any other boyhood memory whose pride has failed to get him anywhere. I think if we're willing to accept the grindstone itself as a symbol for the world, the whole shebang, if we're willing to accept that, what else is going on here? You have our speaker who is struggling with ego, right? I don't really want to be here, but you say this thing needs to be sharpened and you're challenging me to get this work done and you're saying it's not quite done. Oh, I'll show you, buddy. I'll show you. It's done. We'll get this thing sharpened. There's a little bit of that chip on the shoulder, I think, to many a young man. And if you treat the whole world that way, with that chip on your shoulder, it will return you hate for hate. And eventually, your character will break. And you will forgive it as easily as any other boyhood enemy whose pride has failed to get him anywhere. So if we're willing to accept that, if we're willing to accept that grindstone as a symbol for the world turning, and we're willing to accept the chip on the shoulder of the speaker as a character flaw that many young men have, and we're willing to accept that further in the fact that this poem is coming to us in reminiscence, and is coming to us in reminiscence with a touch of humor. All of these things working together, and we are to understand that what makes the world turn, right? If we're using all these cliches, what makes the world turn? Work, hard work, makes the world turn. A very Robert Frost message there. Hard work makes the world turn, and often hard work with individuals maybe you don't really get along with. And fittingly, that work, that hard work, is the grind, right? That hard work here is the grind, the grindstone. So much grinding has been done that the world itself seems off kilter. And what was the phrase there? It ran as if it wasn't greased, but glued. How often does life feel that way? That no matter how much you buck, no matter how much you kick, it feels as if your life is glued into place as opposed to being greased in order that you might make progress in this world. And then we get the speaker, I'd welcome any moderate disaster that might be calculated to postpone what evidently nothing could conclude. You ever found yourself hoping for a snowstorm to get out of work or school? Ever found yourself with the flu and think, well, at least I'm not putting up truck? Something like that. So finally, in this poem, we have an invocation of the question, mightn't we, with this work, do more harm than good? Mightn't we, if we keep going, just ruin things? Go one turn past good enough. And then we're just dulling the blade. Well, we're not dulling the blade, but we're getting rid of useful metal where metal had been. At what point do we reach that question in life? Are we really doing any good here? You know, very literally, they say, for most people, earning $60,000 a year, any more than that, and you're not really making an impact in your own life. It's just extra work for money that doesn't make you any happier. I think it probably depends pretty greatly on where in the country you are, right, obviously. But they say around $60,000. After that, if you're cranking that grindstone, baby, it's just wasting metal. And there's only so much metal. Eventually, that blade will be run clean through. How easy is it to accidentally go one turn too far in life? Is this a question that we ask ourselves often enough? I think maybe not. I know that in my life, I am certainly guilty of burning the candle at both ends. As Christopher Hitchens said, you burn the candle at both ends and it gives off a very pretty glow. Where is our speaker? From where is our speaker coming to us? Having a wheel and four legs of its own has never availed the cumbersome grindstone to get anywhere that I can see. These hands have helped it go, and even race. Not all the motion though they ever lent, not all the miles it may have thought it went, have got it one step from the starting place. Our speaker here seems to be in a contemplative state. It is sort of a weird place to be. I mean, think about your workplace. Wherever your workplace is, pick the second, third most thing that you use in your workplace, right? So for me, use that a lot, right? Probably not that. I use a push cart a lot. I use a dolly a lot. Were I to sit and make a metaphor for a dolly, I'd have to be in a real weird place, right? So this speaker is someone for whom work is life. We have these ideas of bringing work home with us, right? Do we bring this work home with us? Do you have a job that you have to take home with you? Do you get to clock out and leave? Do you get to have your weekends? In modern society, a lot of us have these questions. Our speaker is coming to us from a place where that is not the case. An individual's worth in our speaker's world is the depth to which he's able to contribute work. What a hell of a place to be, right? We haven't been in that place for decades in the West, in the United States, where I'm at. Even in the Midwest, a place where people identify, I think, a lot more with their work than many other places in the country. Sometimes, I think, sadly so, myself included, right? So our speaker being in that contemplative state, being in that place where he is making metaphors from, his second or third most used thing at work, right? His work tools. This too, I think, is something that we have largely lost. I think that we have largely moved away from being a literate society. I really do. And I don't mean that in a condescending tone. I think that it's not necessary very much anymore. I think that I'm sure there's an actual term for this. The way that I refer to it is as such. Functional literacy and functional illiteracy. I think most people are functionally illiterate. That is, that they can read things and the words will make sense to them, But if they are trying to follow directions, they might get there. And if you're following directions and you might get there, what does that mean to you about things like this? About the literary level of things. You know, and part of the reason we don't have to have functional literacy anymore, well, hell, you come home, you got YouTube and Netflix. You got Disney Plus. You got HBO Max, maybe? Not sure what it's called. The types of entertainment by which we are gripped these days are not necessarily intellectually stimulating. This collection, New Hampshire, I believe was published in the 20s. Original title page of the 1923 edition. So it's possible that it was published before 1923. We'll just say 1923. 1923, you were doing hard day's labor, probably. Then you had to come home and do some type of hard labor at home in order to stay warmer or eat. You weren't stopping at McDonald's on the way home. And then, if you wanted to be entertained, you were picking up something like this. And maybe you just read these poems on the surface level. Maybe. It's possible. But I think most people, once they are exposed to the ideas that roil under the surface of something like poetry, once people sort of make that connection with words saying one thing and meaning another, I think for most people, that is an addictive type of thought process. It is so intriguing, and it is so illuminating, and it is very much like being on the inside. It's almost tribal. It's almost a tribal feeling. It's almost like when your favorite football team wins, when you break into a poem and you get some deeper meaning from it. And that was a light evening for people in the 20s, right? We don't have that. You know, thank God we don't have that. Thank Allah, thank whoever it is that you need to thank that we don't have that. Thank Hitchens himself that we don't have that. But we don't have that. We're softer than that. But here's the thing. We're only softer than that by choice. We could be that hard. In a stoic type of way, we could choose every day to do some hard labor, to do some physical work, to take the long way home by walking, and then to do reading and really try to digest those things that we've read. We could do that, but we're not going to. We're just not. We're not going to go back unless we're thrown back there. Listen to me. I sound like Robert Frost. I'm a cantankerous old man. It's weird what reading a little Robert Frost will do to you. Make you a cranky fella. A cranky fellow in the grass. A cranky fellow in the snow. I just threw a pin on accident. That's all I have for this poetry discussion before I get too weird and antsy and out of place. So if you like this sort of thing, it really does help me out here on the channel if you hit that like button. I hope to have you back here for the next poetry discussion I do, for the next poetry review I do, for the next short story discussion, short story review, novel read along, whatever it is I'm doing here on the channel. Opening paragraph, writer's quote, all of that stuff. Got playlists for all those things on the channel. So consider checking those things out as well. And I hope to have you here for the next video, but not until then. So get lost.